In professional wrestling, a DDT is any move in which the wrestler has the opponent in a front facelock inverted headlock, and falls down or backwards to drive the opponent's head into the mat. The classic DDT is performed by putting the opponent in a front facelock and falling backwards so that the opponent is forced to dive forward onto his or her head. The move was named by Jake Roberts, who accidentally invented the move in the 1980s. Rumors abound as to what the letters DDT supposedly stood for, including Drop Dead Twice, Demonic Death Trap or Damien's Death Touch, Drop Downtown, Death Drop Technique and Damien's Dinner Time after Jake's pet python Damien. When asked what DDT meant, Jake once famously replied the end. The abbreviation itself originally came from the chemical dichloro-diphenyl-trichloroethane, a notorious pesticide, as stated during shoot interviews and Jake's Pick Your Poison DVD. Many think that the term DDT was applied because the chemical DDT is a hazardous chemical buried in the ground which potentially causes brain damage. Similarly, the DDT maneuver buries an opponent's head into the mat, and is therefore hazardous to the brain and spinal cord. Some purport that Rick Rude invented the DDT, which he used to refer to as the Rude Awakening before using a neck breaker by that name. Variations: front facelock variants, Argentine DDT. The wrestler lifts the opponent onto his shoulders as in an Argentine backbreaker rack, pushes the opponent's legs while still holding the front facelock, flipping them over to the front of the wrestler. The wrestler falls down to the mat front first, driving the opponent face first down to the mat. Cradle DDT. The wrestler applies a front facelock to the opponent, then lifts the opponent into an elevated leg trap Bodhi scissors position and finally fall backwards, driving the opponent head first down to the mat. WWE Diva Page uses this as a finisher, calling it the Rampage. Double underhook DDT. Instead of applying a head or facelock, the wrestler bends his opponent forward and hooks each arm behind the opponent's head. This is known as a butterfly. The wrestler then tucks the opponent's head under one of his arms, and then falls back to pull the opponent down either flat on his face, which is the more common variant, or onto the top of their head, causing them to roll over, like in a regular DDT. It is also known as a double-arm DDT or a butterfly DDT. Drew Galloway and Mick Foley have been known to use variations of this DDT. The face-first variant is technically known as an implant double underhook DDT. Modified versions exist, such as a lifting version, a variation where the attacker applies Bodhi scissors prior to executing the move, or simply using a single underhook instead of a double underhook. Another variation is the snap version. Elevated DDT. This version of a DDT first sees an attacking wrestler place the opponent on an elevated surface, usually the rope's turnbuckle, while applying a front facelock. The attacking wrestler next draws the opponent away from the elevated surface, leaving the opponent's feet over the elevated surface, making them the only thing other than the wrestler keeping the opponent off the ground. The attacking wrestler then falls backwards so that the opponent is forced to dive forward onto his/her head with extra force due to the height of which they were dropped. This can also be performed as a double T move. A slight variation, known as a diving DDT or a halo DDT, exists and sees the wrestler and the opponent both on an elevated surface, albeit with the wrestler facing the ring. With the opponent in the front facelock, the wrestler and the opponent both dive off the elevated surface, resulting in the wrestler falling forward to perform the DDT instead of falling backwards. The move is sometimes referred to as a spike DDT, because the defending wrestler lands in an upside-down, almost completely vertical, position. This move is also known as the hangman's DDT, which is normally performed with the defending wrestler's feet on the middle rope. It is usually performed to an opponent attempting to enter the ring. Flip DDT, also known as a front flip DDT. After applying a front facelock, the wrestler pushes off the mat with his/her legs to flip the opponent and drive them onto the top of their head in a manner similar to the flip pulley driver. Flip over DDT, also known as a samurai driver. This DDT sees a wrestler place his/her head between the thighs of an opponent before jumping up while pushing away from the opponent's thighs to flip up and sit on the shoulders of the opponent. The wrestler then spreads their legs, dropping off the opponent's shoulders as they grab hold of the opponent's head in a front facelock to fall down to the mat back first, driving the opponent's head down to the mat. This move sees the attacking wrestler get lifted in a powerbomb position, so often this move is used as a counter to a powerbomb. Float over DDT. This DDT sees the wrestler stand in front of his opponent facing at him, duck, hook one of his arms over the opponent's shoulder, swing himself under the opponent's armpit, then around and over the opponent's back so that he faces the same way as the opponent, lock the opponent's head under his other hand's armpit, spin another 180 degree to end up having the opponent locked in a front facelock and fall back to drive the opponent's skull first to the mat, as in a regular DDT. The maneuver is usually performed after the attacker ducks a punch or a clothesline. Fireman's carry DDT, also described as a fireman's carry implant DDT. This move sees the attacking wrestler first put an opponent up in the fireman's carry position, then throw the opponent's legs out in front of him to spin them out while the attacking wrestler switches the position of his arm that's holding the opponent's head to a front facelock and falls backwards to drive the top of the opponent's head into the mat. Fisherman DDT. After applying a front facelock, the wrestler hooks the opponent's near leg with his other arm, lifts them up into a vertical position, and falls backwards onto his back, driving the opponent's head down to the mat. Head scissors DDT. Very different from a classic or traditional DDT, as the wrestler never uses his hand in this variation. The wrestler catches the opponent in a standing head scissors, and then falls backwards, slamming the opponent into the mat face first. Also often referred to as the Hurricane Runner driver or Hurricane Runner Pilly driver. Implant DDT. Implant DDT refers to variations of the DDT where the opponent is driven to the mat face first, as in a phaser plant, and not onto their heads. The most common variation is the lifting DDT. A common variation of the double underhook DDT is the implant variation. Another variation of the implant DDT sees the wrestler place their opponent in a headlock, but instead of falling backwards they leap backwards onto their back, pulling the opponent with them face first to the mat. Jumping DDT, a slight variation where instead of just falling backwards, the wrestler jumps up while holding the front facelock and then uses the weight and momentum to pull the opponent down on their head. Also, a variation of this move is sometimes seen where, as the wrestler jumps, they use the horizontal position to execute a front dropkick to the knees of the opponent to add additional impact to the move. Leg sweep DDT, also known as the Russian leg sweep DDT. In these versions of a DDT the wrestler applies a front facelock and then performs a type of leg sweep to essentially take out the legs from under the opponent before falling backwards to drive the opponent face first down to the mat. Lifting DDT, smash it redirects here. For smash it, see smash it. This version of a DDT is similar to a spike DDT and is often referred to as a low-angle brainbuster, or simply as an implant DDT. The attacking wrestler applies a front facelock to an opponent, then lifts the opponent off the ground just before falling backwards to drive the opponent face or head first down to the mat. A slight variation of this sees the wrestler spin the opponent's body away from themselves as they raise the opponent off the ground. Another version, the lifting inverted DDT, sees the wrestler apply an inverted facelock, lift the opponent off the ground and fall back. Former WWE superstar Edge calls this the Edgecution. Current WWE superstar Heath Slater uses a spinning variation and calls this the Smash It. Over-the-shoulder DDT, the attacking wrestler puts the opponent over the shoulder as in a power slam setup but instead throws them off and around their body, grabbing their head and executing a modified DDT or a modified face buster. Running DDT. The wrestler charges at a bent forward opponent and applies a front facelock before dropping backwards to drive the opponent down to the mat head first. In another variation the wrestler will also push the opponent up with his free arm, hitting a spike DDT version of the move. Scissored DDT. This move sees the wrestler apply the front facelock and then put one of their legs on one of the opponent's arms before falling backward and driving the opponent head first to the mat. Single underhook DDT. The wrestler places the opponent in a front facelock and hooks only one of the opponent's arms behind their neck, as if going for a suplex, before falling back and driving the opponent's head into the mat. This maneuver is a unique and dangerous variation, it is seldom seen. However, The wrestler can control how close the opponent's head reaches the floor. Spike DDT. This DDT variation is actually a mix of a brainbuster and a lifting DDT. The wrestler first applies a regular front facelock, then he lifts the opponent in a vertical position to fall backward and drop the opponent head first down to the mat. Snap DDT. The wrestler applies a front facelock to their opponent. The wrestler then jumps down onto their back, swinging their legs forward, bending the opponent, and driving them down to the mat face, forehead, or head first. A slight variation sees the wrestler draw one of their legs backwards before swinging it forward to build extra momentum. They then drop onto their back, driving the opponent head first to the mat. Another version sees the wrestler kick the opponent in the midsection, as in a flowing DDT, and then quickly perform the DDT. Tilt-a-whirl DDT. This variation sees the charging wrestler being spun into a tilt-a-whirl and ends the move up into a DDT. A reverse DDT variation is also possible. Tornado DDT. The tornado DDT is also referred to as a swinging spinning DDT. A wrestler goes to the top rope and applies a front facelock to an opponent from an elevated position. The wrestler then jumps forward and swings around to fall backwards and drop the opponent's head into the mat. Standing tornado DDT. In this grounded version, the wrestler charges at a standing opponent, jumps up and applies the front facelock in mid-air before swinging his/herself round and falling backwards down to the mat to perform the DDT. This is sometimes known as a jumping swinging DDT and is regularly used by wrestlers that use a standard tornado DDT. Springboard tornado DDT. This version of the DDT sees the wrestler apply the front facelock while on the same level as the opponent and then run up the ring ropes to springboard round and deliver the DDT. Inverted facelock variants. This subsection lists DDTs that involve the opponent being dropped on the back of their heads. The basic inverted DDT is also known as an inverted DDT. Inverted DDT, commonly known as the reverse DDT. A wrestler applies an inverted facelock. The wrestler then falls backwards to slam the back of the opponent's head into the mat. A snap version also exists, in which the wrestler swings their leg for momentum as they slam the opponent's head into the mat. Most notably used by Sting as an impact finisher called the Scorpion Death Drop. Sometimes set up with a scoop lift. Falling inverted DDT. A wrestler applies an inverted facelock. Then the attacker throws his own feet backwards, falling onto his own stomach. The defending wrestler has the back of his head driven into the mat. Half Nelson inverted DDT. The attacking wrestler applies an inverted facelock and puts his arm under the opponent's arm, completing the half Nelson, and drops down with the opponent's head driven into the mat. Inverted tornado DDT. The attacking wrestler applies an inverted facelock from an elevated position. He/she then jumps off so that he/she swings around the opponent. Using the momentum from the jump, he/she falls forwards and slams the back of the opponent's head into the mat. It could also be done when the wrestler is standing on the mat instead of an elevated position. Lifting inverted DDT. The wrestler applies an inverted facelock on the opponent with one arm, and lifts the opponent up with the other. The wrestler then falls backwards down onto their back, slightly to their side, driving the opponent down to the mat upper back and head first. This move is sometimes incorrectly referred to as an inverted DDT or a reverse DDT. Another variation used can be done where the wrestler falls on their stomach instead of their back, which is known as a lifting falling inverted DDT. Swinging inverted DDT. This variation sees a wrestler lock in a front facelock and, while falling backwards, twist their opponent around, resulting in the opponent landing on the back of their head, as in a standing inverted DDT. The same technique can be used to end in a falling inverted DDT. A slight variation of this sees the wrestler reach under the opponent while setting up the move to grab their forearm. From there, the wrestler pulls the arm over, causing the opponent to twist around until they are in an inverted facelock before then dropping backwards for a standard inverted DDT. Tilt-a-whirl inverted DDT, similar to the normal tilt-a-whirl DDT. This DDT sees the charging wrestler being tilt-a-euro or euro-whirled by the opponent. After the maneuver is over, the wrestler holds the opponent into an inverted facelock, and then falling backwards while he's elevated off the mat into an inverted DDT. Standing Shiranui, this is a backflip three-quarter facelock inverted DDT, which is a variation of the Shiranui. In this move a wrestler applies a three-quarter facelock on the opponent and performs a backflip over the opponent while maintaining the facelock, turning it into an inverted facelock, and then either landing face down to the mat, on their own back to the side, on their knees, or in a sitting position, to drive the opponent's head back first down to the mat. This move has several names, usually depending on the person performing it. The official name of the move used to be the Usai DDT, as it was innovated by Yoshiro Usai, who performs a moonsault to execute this move. Vertical suplex DDT. The wrestler applies a front facelock and lifts the opponent's leg like any vertical suplex and falls into the mat. See also, professional wrestling throws, notes.